Welcome to Evidence Based, a new Harbinger psychology podcast. I'm your host, Cassie Stossel. On today's episode, we're talking about neurodivergent skills with Jennifer Kemp, co-author of the Neurodivergence Skills Workbook for Autism and ADHD. Jennifer is a privately practicing clinical psychologist based in Adelaide, South Australia, who works with neurodivergent adults experiencing perfectionism, eating disorders, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and chronic illness. Using a neurodiversity-affirming approach, Jennifer weaves together acceptance and commitment therapy and behavioral and compassion-focused approaches with her own lived experience as a late-diagnosed autistic ADHDer to help her clients improve their mental health and develop greater self-compassion, self-acceptance, and pride in their neurodivergent identity. Jennifer juggles clinical practice with writing, presenting, and clinical supervision. She's also the author of the ACT Workbook for Perfectionism. Hi, Jennifer. Thanks so much for joining me today.
I'm really excited to be back here with you and to be talking about my current favorite topic, Cassie.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you back. And this is such an important topic. And, a lot more people are discovering their neurodivergence later in life. So I thought we could start off with just talking about what is neurodivergence.
Yeah, sure. And I'm one of those people too, having found out that I'm autistic at age 48. So, neurodivergence is, I guess it's best to understand it in the context of neurodiversity. So, we have about 8 billion people on this planet, and every single one has a different neurology. And we often talk about autism and ADHD as being, differences in our brain, but it's our entire neurology. So, our central nervous system, which includes our spinal cord, our peripheral nervous system, it's every cell in our body essentially. So, neurodivergence means that there are some people in this sort of broader neurodiversity, which includes neurotypical people, I guess you'd say. There are some people that share some qualities that sort of make them a little bit sort of significantly different, I guess you'd say, from what people would consider to be typical, and share characteristics that sort of group them together. There are lots of different types of neurodivergence. So, autism and ADHD are just two. Nowadays, we're conceptualizing things like schizophrenia, bipolar, even things like epilepsy, giftedness. They're all different types of neurodivergence. People have differences in the way their brain and entire neurology are working, essentially. That sort of sets them into, I guess, a group we will call a neurotype. So, a group of people that share these same sort of characteristics.
Yeah, and I really love the terminology. I think it really explains what people are experiencing. And as we mentioned at the beginning, a lot of people are being diagnosed later in life, particularly with autism and ADHD. Why do you think that is? And what sort of set of challenges does that bring when you are diagnosed later in life?
We have a different understanding now of neurodivergence. So, if we sort of narrow that to autism and ADHD, putting aside a huge number of different types of neurodivergence out there, people with autism and ADHD, we have diagnostic criteria that are based on a certain way that presents, basically in white, upper middle class, or wealthy American boys. Let's face it, the sort of people who can afford to go and see a psychiatrist in the US. Those studies, the original studies, were really only about boys, and they reflect a certain way that autism and ADHD can present. We're now understanding that those same internal differences in the way that we're processing information about the world express differently in different people. So, there's a huge number of women like women who perhaps have autistic or ADHD children who are going, hang on a second, I think this applies to me, and family members, and we're better understanding what autism and ADHD look like in groups of people, that people of color, people who come from different sort of cultures. It's harder to recognize those differences in cultures that are not your own. And so because we're used to sort of what it looks like to kind of be us, and then like something that looks different, it's harder. But we're starting to be able to recognize it in other cultural groups within our society, and indigenous people and so on. So, for every child that is diagnosed ADHD or an autistic, there's going to be a parent. This is genetic. There's going to be probably a parent there, other people in that family, and we're sort of starting to recognize those people, which is why I believe about 80% of autistic women are currently unidentified. And now we're starting to unpack that, just starting to find that. I think we're at this just at the start of this wave, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And in your book, you write that autism and ADHD share the same genetic origins. And I found that to be really interesting. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, they do. There's been some studies that have shown, there's one study in particular that was one of those studies where they gather together sort of like big data sets, and
Hmm.
the total number of cases or people in this study was 720,000 people. So like big amounts of data, and they looked for relationships within that and found shared, this is genetic data, they found shared genetic markers for a cluster that included autism, ADHD, and Tourette syndrome. Another one that was Tourette's, OCD, and anorexia, and a separate group that was major depression, schizophrenia, and bipolar. And so people who shared those sort of diagnoses also shared similar genetic markers. And about at least 85% of autistic people would meet the criteria for ADHD, and at least 50% of ADHDers would meet the criteria for autism. So there's a real blurring between the two, and a lot of people out there who diagnosed an ADHD and who are going, yeah, but I also kind of feel different socially and feel like I've got these sensory sensitivities, and those would potentially be suggestive that they're also autistic. So there's been this kind of almost like an arbitrary line drawn that is sliced off the executive functioning difficulties, and that's all in ADHD and nothing much else, really. That's what ADHD describes. And then kind of all the rest, which is sitting in autism. And so there are more people that are, with those sort of statistics of overlap, there would be more people who are what we call ADHD than there would be only autistic or only ADHD.
That's so interesting. And it does make a lot of sense, especially as I dove more into your book too, about these being so connected and so similar. And as we talk about embracing a neurodivergent identity, why is self compassion so important in doing so?
We're living in a world that is not set up it's set up for the majority. It's not set up for minorities of any kind. Autism and ADHD are just one of those differences. And so we're living in a world that we're having to constantly navigate. Part of being autistic, it's like you haven't sort of downloaded the social rule book that everyone else seems to get when they're born. And so you're kind of working it out. And it is possible to work this out, but you can spend a lot of time trying to navigate social situations because the way people are the way people are behaving just doesn't feel logical, doesn't feel like it makes sense to you. And it's just one example. So, autistic people have different social expectations based on honesty, consistency, fairness. These are not always qualities you'll see in human interactions. And so, those interactions, right, they don't make sense and can lead to a lot of frustration. Over time, these sort of differences in communication and social understanding and expectations lead to lots of, I guess you'd say, like friction. Like the greater the mismatch between you as a person and the environment around you, the more friction there's going to be, the more difficulties you'll experience. You're much more likely as an autistic person and an ADHD to experience trauma, even things like just bullying, being criticized, or why are you late all the time? Can't you get your homework done? You need to, you know, pull yourself up and work harder, all this sort of constant criticism and all these little social sort of friction points, miscommunications. autistic people and ADHD is just kind of internalize that in the end. It becomes an ongoing, really pervasive self criticism. And this self criticism, I haven't met an autistic person, there's very few who don't have this, but certainly who show up to therapy.
Yeah.
um, it's, it, this is why we need self compassion, because the world seems harsh to us, and then we end up being really harsh to ourselves. There's a long answer, but it's a sort of need to really like behave in ways that make our life easier, and look for what we need as humans, like what makes us feel comfortable, how we can accommodate our differences, and all of this is practicing self-compassion in everyday life.
Yeah, that's such a crucial piece. And, my husband is on the spectrum, and he is the hardest person on himself about everything you were just mentioning, like being late or misunderstanding, or like it's not just like a mistake, it's like becomes like an entire piece of his identity that he's not good or he's not valuable, or like it one mistake and he goes that far. So it is so important, this piece of self-compassion. So I'm really glad that that sort of is at the forefront of your book. And now I want to get into a little bit more about monotropism. How does this help explain part of the autistic experience, and what does it mean to be in your spin?
Monotropism it's a theory. It's a theory of attention that describes how some people have a narrower and deeper focus of their attention. So that something is either like really interesting to you, a sort of smaller number of things are really interesting, and then there's all these other things that just aren't interesting at all. And they developed this theory, Dina Murray and others, that over just over 20 years ago. Dina has sadly passed away since then, but her son Fergus Murray is continuing with this research, and Wen Lawson, who was there at the start, also developing this. After developing this theory that there are these people who do this, that hang on, these people are autistic, and sort of an after the fact. So it's Monotropism isn't necessarily confined to autistic people, but it certainly describes a lot of the autistic experience. Our whole lives are really oriented around our interests, and I'm really lucky because I sort of stumbled onto psychology as being like an interest straight after school. I didn't know what to do, and I wanted to go to university. And I was told to study, like I did, testing, and they said you should do architecture or engineering. And I went, great, thanks, I'm going to do psychology. And because, and to be contrary, I was like, and I'm not going to go to the university like around the corner from home, because my brother goes there. I need to go somewhere different. And so I like schlepped it across the city every day, and was really lucky because I instantly found it really fascinating. I mucked about a lot for my first couple of few years, and my grades were not that great. But I had discovered this whole way, like just that humans are inherently fascinating, and there's always more to learn. And so I'm in my spin. A spin is a short name for like we sort of a cute way of describing a special interest. I find special interest comes sort of from the diagnostic criteria, but it sounds a little patronizing. So and I'll use the phrase, but it's really fun to sort of say, collapse that and say, I'm in my spin. Like just talking to you now, like I'm just in my spin. And it's like so fun to talk about this topic. So over time, my interest in psychology has evolved, and that's what happens in your spin. I was very interested in different facets of psychology over the years, and now I'm like really interested in autism and ADHD, and that's what I really want to talk about. So, what can happen when you have this sort of narrower, deeper focus is that, well, first of all, someone might be talking about something else like the footy or something, and I just have no interest. And it's like, it's not even like a passing interest. Like, I literally feel like empty. I just feel like, oh, I don't want to talk about this. Um, and it's actually really uncomfortable. And so I will just try and avoid that conversation, or I'll like zone out immediately when I lose interest. And so when, also there's lots of things that are really boring, like, housework, running your business, replying to emails, all of those things give me that kind of ugh, feeling. And so it can be really hard to make yourself do that. And what I'm noticing happening in this conversation is I'm just talking on and on because you can tell like I'm excited and I'm in my spin and my hands are moving around and forgetting that I need to like stop talking at some point.
I love it because this is how I talk to my husband. So this is great. I'm used to this. And I think you point out in your book too that you have to get the full thought out. Like even if there's an interruption, you pick right back up and finish the complete thought.
Like I know socially sometimes you have to let it go, but it's really frustrating when the subject changes and I had a really good point.
You're like, yes.
What it can mean is that we miss the cue that other people have zoned out because we're so excited about what we're talking about, which is exactly what I'm doing now. It's hilarious.
How does this monotropism differ or is similar to hyperfixations?
In ADHD, we would talk about hyperfixations or hyperfocus. I do think they're both sort of, I guess, models of attention. Both autism and ADHD feature kind of an interest-based nervous system. Like it's like your whole body is like aligned to things that are interesting, and the things that aren't interesting, admin, housework, so on, are just really not interesting. So the same thing applies to ADHD. As I'm an ADHDer as well, you couldn't tell, and so hyperfixations are a little bit more. They're more short-lived, and they feel like a surge of dopamine, like really happy feelings, like you discover something and you just need to know everything about it and go on a deep dive. And like you discover a new musician and you find like all of their music and you go way into their back catalog and you learn all about them, and then one day suddenly you just can't listen to them anymore. It's like it's just like the dopamine runs out. Now I don't know whether it feels like dopamine, and I think there are dopamine theories about this, but it's not really been proven. We would say we're kind of dopamine mining when we're in that state. It's like I'm like getting more and more dopamine. I'm just going to keep digging and digging, and all of a sudden the seam just runs out, and it's like I can't even ever listen to that album ever again. Um, and so there's a sort of a really sharp rise and fall, which is quite different to monotropism, which is this ongoing, like, evolving life fascination. So to think about the professor who's been researching the same field for 30 years and it still finds it fascinating. That's monotropism. Yeah. Whereas the person who's got a shed or a garage just full of like half started and or finished craft projects, that's
Mhm.
hyperfixations.
I am not going to be attacked by my craft graveyard. But you're right, it is a dopamine thing. But what I find interesting in what you're talking about, so like if I'm using my husband as an example, he has this, but it's like permanent hyperfixations. Like he likes multiple things that he does orient everything around. Do you experience that as someone who, identifies as autistic and ADHD?
Yeah, yeah. It's funny how they interact. So you might have like a long-term interest, and then you just spend a whole lot of time like researching one tiny part of it, and then you sort of move on. They definitely interact. I do relate to that. I have other spins, so I'm really interested in interior design, and I like mid-century design a lot. You can probably tell from the room behind me, I've been styling this room to try and get the mid-century vibe going. I'm interested in architecture and art and like a lot of aesthetic type things as well. So those are things that I'll tend to dip into. That my job is in psychology, so I would spend a lot more time on that. But when I'm on holidays, I might take a psychology textbook, but I never read it. I also take a whole bunch of like home magazines, and I spend hours like poring over them, hopping onto Pinterest, looking up different ideas, thinking, measuring things, like I just go right into that for a while. And then holidays are over and I have to move back. And so, I am someone I could have a long conversation about tile choices or colors of white, or like if someone's decorating their home, I'm like right there. Like, but I don't get those opportunities as often, right?
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say you should see my husband's office. His spin must be just like physical media and the arts. Like he's very interested in movies, very interested in music. He always jokes with me that his other flavor of the tism, as he says, is he loves roller coaster videos, and like theme parks are a big one for him.
Oh.
But yeah, I was interested because I feel like he has a lot, but he like kind of dips in and out of them. But I guess the movies would probably be like the major constant. And you actually do lay out a list in the book of common hyperfixations and spins. Can you talk about a few of those? Because I was like checking them off.
Oh, right. Yeah, I mean, look, anything could be one, really. We just sort of put together a list of spins that were kind of like either ourselves or our clients, and like we've also put it out to our colleagues who are like ADHDers and said, what do you think? Yeah, it could be that music as a spin, considering also just remembering movies also have music in them, right? And they have a narrative. So perhaps a thread for your husband that ties it together is his love of really powerful stories or love of things that really shift his emotions. So that could be music, movies, powerful stories in any other form. Someone who had those interests might also love role playing or love sort of gaming, things that tend to the games that have a narrative in them, those sorts of things. So they're different expressions of a sort of a thread or a theme. But there's a lot of people out there who really love the classic sort of science and engineering type topics or history. There's an enormous number of autistic women, I think, who are really into true crime podcasts and like certain eras of world history, and it can be quite obscure. I would say that there's oftentimes as well that people might embarrass you, like, or shame you for your interests. And lots of adults really love Disney, for example, or animation, those sorts of things. And so people may say, this is too childish. This is too, like, why are you spending all your time with this? I guess if it's your spin, it's your spin. Like, it's really hard if you can't spend time in it because you feel embarrassed or ashamed. So it's really important to claim those things and just embrace them. And like if your own quirkiness, like if this is what you're into, if you're really interested in machinery in World War II between 1943 and 45, like if that's your thing, like go for it, right? Like it's not hurting anyone else.
Exactly. I had a brief hyperfixation with Victorian mourning jewelry.
Hmm.
And I went on like deep dives, like looking like they made jewelry out of hair, like just random like these were like random things that like I found that I had a lot more hyperfixations during the pandemic and like trying to find that dopamine. But yeah, you like what you like and it's not hurting anyone. So
Yeah, I'm busting to ask you questions about morning jewelry. I was not sure whether it was like morning, like early in the day, but then I heard morning, like, so when someone dies, then like you take a lock of their hair or.
yeah, they would make like really intricate pieces and like it was a very affordable way to like mourn your relatives because it was easily accessible and they actually used to like collect their hair as they brushed it. Like there was a piece of a vanity set where you literally collect your hair. So it was really easily accessed. Like they made brooches, rings. It's actually really beautifully intricate. A lot of lockets because they would have these like official mourning periods. So they would wear like the pins and the yeah.
One of the biggest sources of joy is actually asking someone about their spin. Like I didn't know this thing existed, and I can hear your curiosity. Your like I can access some of like your passion about this, and it's like really cool for me to listen to it because of the way like your interest in is that even though it's not your current hyperfixation, it is actually really, really interesting topic. So this is one way as a therapist or as a friend of other neurodivergent people. It's really like it's really beautiful to ask people about their interests. It creates a real sense of connection, and you get to see their face light up, and you get to see people like talk about obscure things and learn stuff. Like I love learning stuff, so I'm going to probably go and look that up later. It's not going to be a lasting interest, but it's just like this sort of, wow, it's kind of macabre, but it's also kind of like cool. Like, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Definitely email me about it after you look it up.
oh, okay.
We'll be right back after this short break.
When you first are diagnosed with BPD, or you're first told that you may have borderline personality disorder, it can be very frightening and overwhelming, because we have these ideas of what this disorder is, and you can feel trapped within it, trapped within this view or perspective of this thing that feels bigger than you and bigger than life. But the reality is that this is a disorder that can be managed, and that learning adaptive strategies can help you control it and do your life differently so that you determine the course of your life, not your BPD. To learn more and to sign up, go to bpdcourse.com.
New Harbinger online courses, self-help for everyone. I want to talk about the executive functioning piece that we mentioned. Why is this piece so hard for neurodivergent people?
Yeah, well, so our uh, executive functioning describes the parts, I guess, the functions of the brain that are like our internal management and administration center. I love this sort of analogy of it being the admin team for the entire firm. And some people have like a full like team of admin people. I'm currently watching Mad Men. I've never seen it. But there's sort of all these offices where these guys are like just sitting, smoking and drinking all the time. Then there's this huge pool of secretaries, right, that are running around actually doing all the work. So some people have that kind of full suite of admin support, and some people have like one guy on crutches running around, papers are piling up, they're getting behind. So we all have like a different capacity in our executive functions, which includes not just getting organized, it includes that sort of working memory where you can remember something someone's just told you and hold it in your head, like when someone tells you their name and you can just hold it in your head. I don't have that skill. I just instantly forget. Or like they say, can you pick up this, this, and this from the supermarket? Like it's once it's past two things, like my working memory is reaching its capacity. Yeah. So, and there's also emotion regulation as an executive function too. So our ability to sort of calm ourselves down when we're upset. So whenever the demand on these resources exceeds the supply, you're going to feel overwhelmed. And it seems like it's kind of one goes, they all go. So, for example, if you were moving house and you had a lot of things to organize, you could feel really overwhelmed by trying to keep that all in your head and trying to get it all done. And your emotion regulation is not going to be the same at that time either. So you're more likely to be snappy or moody or upset because you're sort of overwhelmed in general. For a lot of people, I think about women. I think my autism compensated really well for my ADHD, for my executive functioning for a really long time. You develop a lot of compensatory strategies, like being really organized and having everything in your diary. Like I have literally had pick up child from school in my diary. Like you think you won't forget that, but I don't want to book
Don't want to take
something
the
over
chance.
that time. I want to take the chance. And that sort of held everything together. And then as I've got older and maybe perimenopausal, estrogen is linked to executive function. So whenever that drops, both mid-cycle every month and after having a baby and perimenopause, like there's lots of times where this falls away, you seem to have less capacity of executive functioning. And so I think about people becoming a parent for the first time. The demand on your executive functioning means that all of a sudden the house is much messier, the washing isn't done, you're forgetting things, you're running late, like all of those things are going on because the demand has exceeded the supply, basically. So it's really important to try and reduce the demands as much as you can if you're struggling with this, to simplify your life, to reduce that burden.
Yeah, and talking about these skills that are maybe harder, I want to talk about what are some common strengths that ADHDers and autistic people have.
So you can definitely harness your monotropic interests and hyperfixations. ADHDers can, and autistic people, I think too, can focus on things, particularly if you can make them nice, novel, interesting, challenging, or an emergency. So a lot of us rely on emergencies, like set deadlines, like create or leave things to the last minute, and then I can only do it when it's at the last minute. I panic a lot earlier than that. But to make things novel, say you had like the chores around your house that you had to do, you could, for example, make it novel by finding a different way of doing it that you've never done before. You could make it interesting by doing these tasks of to a certain piece of music or in a certain rhythm or a certain way that kind of keep makes it like more interesting. You could make it a challenge by seeing how much you could get done in 10 minutes, or and that sort of creates an emergency, sort of an urgency there, so that you can manipulate the task to sort of meet, to sort of access some of these strengths. Like ADHDers make, really often brilliant people in a crisis because the emergency is there and they can absolutely hyper focus and get it done. You can like create some of that novelty, some of that interest, create a challenge for yourself. It can really help, and it's something you can really harness, even if it's making your chores in a theme of like your favorite Disney characters or something. Like make it more interesting, make it more aesthetically beautiful, whatever it is that really like taps into your monotropic interests as well. Often neurodivergent strengths, autistic strengths really include things like pattern recognition. So the ability to put things together quickly by just gathering a few data points. I honestly realize now I'm so inattentive in my like ADHD. I've been having to do that my whole life. So that skill of pattern recognition where I'm going, I missed all of that. Let me pay attention for a minute and see what I'm supposed to be doing and where I'm supposed to be. Doesn't always work, but I can really lean on my strength in pattern recognition. And there are lots of others as well. Like there's been such a long focus on deficits and a sort of pathology paradigm. It's really differences, and if you can access those differences and make the most of them, um, can I tell you one more? Like I find really fascinating. There's been a number of studies over the years that have talked about like autistic people's social deficits, and like one study, for example, found that non-autistic people, the amount of money they would donate or their willingness to donate to a charity depended on who was witnessing it. If peers were witnessing it, they were much more likely to do the donation. But if no one was witnessing it, they were far less likely to do it. So it was their behaviour depended on their social context, whereas autistic people were equally likely to give to a charity. It didn't matter whether anyone was watching or not. So that was framed as a social deficit in that paper, that we were not sufficiently like tuned into the social situation around us. I would frame that as a strength, right? We're not do not succumb to peer pressure. Do what we think is the right thing, even when it doesn't matter who's saying it. We'll still want to do the right thing. So this is like we're still uncovering this. There's been some beautiful work just in the last couple of years about strengths, like broadening the way we understand autism to really focus on those kinds of strengths.
Yeah, I'm so glad there's more work on that because it's so true. And, in conversations that I've had with my husband, even like I've talked about the things I love about him, and so many of them are his autistic traits. Like it like defines who he is. And like that's what I love about him. And so I always like to remind him if he's having like a bad, personal day to himself or he's being really cruel to himself, like those are the reasons I love you, actually. Like, those are exactly why I fell in love with you.
Yeah, that loyalty, the like consistency, fairness, these are all really important to autistic people, and I think makes really for good, really good partners. We can be a little bit, stubborn or
No.
can be like a little bit like, I don't understand why you would do that. That's not fair or that's not consistent. So yeah, we're not all perfect, but
Yeah, no, I agree. And as we're talking about, I just want to ask about burnout. This is very common in the neurodivergent community. What does it look like and why is it so common?
yeah, there's been some great research on autistic burnout, and I literally did a search yesterday for something around ADHD burnout and couldn't find anything. The ADHD research is at least a decade behind the autism research, I think, sadly. So autistic burnout is different from the kind of occupational burnout that we often talk about. It includes your whole body, so it's sensory overload and social stress, and the things that cause it might be executive functioning overload. And even though there's no research, ADHD has absolutely experienced burnout. Like it's sort of this chronic sense of overwhelm and like feeling exhausted all the time. Doesn't matter how much sleep you get, you still feel exhausted. When you're in burnout, you'll notice like you'll pick up more, or it'll exacerbate some of the habits you'd rather not have, like skin picking or pulling your hair, or those sorts of things definitely worsen. And I guess you're probably just trying to self-soothe. Burnout can be kind of short-lived. Like sometimes at the end of a day, if I've seen like a lot of clients, so six or more clients in a day, I get to the end of the day, particularly if they've been hard conversations, and I'm kind of almost, I can't really talk basically. Like I can talk, I can go through the motions, but my family have realized that they're not going to actually get much sense out of me. Like, don't ask me questions that are complex. So I kind of lose some of my normal everyday ability in that. And it takes me an hour or two sometimes to really recover. And then I actually start to feel myself again. And you can also have a much more chronic sense of burnout, just being constantly overwhelmed by the demands of life, particularly if you're expected or you need to mask a lot. It definitely triggers burnouts. If you're always having to change yourself to fit in and don't feel accepted and so on. Burnout can last for years for people. I think when in therapy, when people come to therapy, they're almost, oh well, they're always in burnout, and sometimes it's been going on for decades, and they've just been their lives has been really difficult for a really long time. To alleviate burnout, you need to sort of do self-soothing, like in those sort of that hour after work. Like I might just go into a quiet room, just scroll on my phone, do Wordle or something, just sort of mindlessly have a cup of tea, stare into space. Like I just need quiet and not to be talking really in that time, and that helps me recover. So you can do sort of sensory soothing type things. The longer term burnout, it's harder because it really does take, I think, stepping back a little, like doing all those sort of soothing things, but also changing your life, really. The things that I end up working with people on and that I've had to do, because I hit really severe burnout last year and I'm really starting to feel I'm just recovering now, like a year later, basically, is really reduce, like you might need to work less, you might need to work shorter days or work from home, need to simplify your life. That can be really hard if you've got small children running around. You need to work and so on. So that can make things really hard. It's hard to escape. And I think a lot of neurodivergent people, like we live in burnout. Like it has a big impact on your physical health. You get more migraines, worse pain, like an actual like illness. Yes, we have higher rates of all the autoimmune diseases and even like cardiovascular disease, cancer, like higher rates of these things in our lives. Yeah, all the chronic ones, basically everything from asthma to celiac, and yeah. And so I think that that burnout really adds to that load. And
When your body is stressed, and you're not able to properly care for it, in times of stress, and it just keeps compounding. Like, that totally makes sense, and why it's so important to take the space, like what you're talking about, like take that hour and just do whatever you need to do to recharge. When we're talking about that, you mentioned masking, which I want to ask, one, why doesn't it work? And two, what are some ways that someone can safely unmask? Because I think that's an important distinction there.
Yeah, so masking is a set of behaviors that we do in order to fit in and make our lives easier and stay safe, basically. So as a neurodivergent person, you've probably experienced, some bullying or certainly miscommunications, misunderstandings, people haven't liked you. Masking is a way of molding yourself. So either suppressing your differences so that and yourself, like not sharing your interests, not sharing your opinions, always making a joke, like pushing it all down inside, really. Or like camouflaging yourself. So, behaving in a certain way to fit in, like being the joker, the happy-go-lucky person, or even sort of saying, everyone really loves Fred, like I'll behave like Fred. Like that's it's a decision people make, but it takes a lot of effort. It makes social situations very draining. And in the end, you're left with this sort of this hollow feeling, right? Like they wouldn't like me if they really saw who I was. Like I'm pretending to be someone else. I'm really hiding the parts of me that are important to me. And you don't feel accepted. You don't feel really liked and appreciated. It's a really hollow feeling in the friendships. So it can be, effective enough. So it can help you get by at work. You can, you're still invited to social situations, but you don't always feel you're sort of playing a role and you just don't feel like you're at the heart of those relationships. So over time, it takes a big toll. And, there are some studies that have shown that it doesn't matter how well we think we're masking, there's still like small differences that people will pick up and judge us negatively for. We don't necessarily know what they are. There was one study by Noel Sasson and others who found that non-autistic people watch these 2 to 4 second snippets of a range of people, both autistic and non-autistic, and with the sound off, just snippets of them kind of socially interacting. And after just watching these tiny thin slices and not knowing that these people were autistic, that they judged that the autistic people that they saw were less likely to want to hang out with, sit next to. They judged them as less attractive, less like socially confident. Yeah, and so we are being judged, we are being evaluated. It's not intentional, it's just the way I guess people are, looking for people who are like them. I think unmasking safely, to answer the second part of your question, is I think honestly, like we feel safe when we're with neurokin, when we're with people who share a neurotype or a similar neurotype, when we feel like we can totally be ourselves, be as odd and quirky, like info dump on our favorite topics like we've been doing today, behave in ways that just feel enjoyable. That's how you can unmask. It's unmasking isn't a one person thing, it's an interpersonal thing. Like we unmask to others. We also, to some extent, unmask to ourselves in that we discover who we are. That's a process of like, I guess, discovering yourself, particularly after a late diagnosis. The sort of unmasking most people talk about is starting to try out like what does feel comfortable. Maybe I don't need to always be smiling. Maybe I don't need to hold eye contact for the whole conversation. Maybe it is okay just to sort of sit alongside someone, chat a little bit, but be on our phones. Maybe I don't need to be like face to face having coffee or be in loud restaurants, or maybe there's ways I can just live that feel good for me. And the key is finding safe people that you can do that with. It's most, not always, but most likely to be other neurokin. Like that's going to be easier for a start. You don't feel like you have to, twist yourself into a pretzel just to kind of fit into this social situation anymore.
Yeah, it's got to be refreshing. And I feel like you said the word safe people, which before I even knew of my husband's diagnosis, I would kind of pick up on the friends of mine or people that because I'm a quite social person, and I would pick up on the people that he seemed, you know, he called it socially awkward, but it less socially awkward around, and like who he felt like he could connect with. And, I would always give him the opportunity, like, you don't have to come with me if you don't want to, but like I'm going to hang out with so and so. And so I was finding safe people for him where he felt more himself, but I hadn't realized what I was doing until we've just put terms to it. But yeah, I was doing that long before we knew about his diagnosis. So it's so important to find those people. Yeah. And just like, I'm thinking as we're talking about this group of friends that we have here locally, my husband, as I said, really loves movies. And so we've been watching through AFI's top 100 list. So we started like a little movie club. So every Wednesday we have a movie club. Tonight, of course, he's not here, but we have a movie club and he gives this little spiel about it and like the history of it. And of course, he's already seen every movie on the list, but it's fun like watching him in his element and being excited to share it with our friends. And so I've loved that bit, and that feels like a really nice unmasking for him too.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. Yeah. Our relationships don't only have to be with neurokin. Like there, I think there's definitely room for relationships with non-neurodivergent people who, but I think we do need like really easygoing, supportive people sometimes. It sounds like you're a beautiful partner and supportive, partner for your husband, and it's just recognizing that those differences are valid, and that's what makes this person who they are, and appreciating them, and that's enough, really. Not needing to judge. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Oh, well, I love that. That feels like a good place for us to wrap up, unless you have any final thoughts for our listeners.
Oh gosh, a zillion. How many days have you got? No, I really hope that anyone who's listening, whether you're a health professional or a neurodivergent person, you're just really curious about this topic, like dive into it. I hope it's my sincere hope that the book is really useful for people, and I just want something practical out there. We put our, Monique and I put our like heart and soul into this book, and I knew that autistic people will be reading it and potentially fact checking me. So I like a lot of like anxiety around making sure the details are right. And there's probably mistakes in it too. I'm sure I'll get that email at some point.
You're
But
human.
apparently so. I hope it's useful. And yeah, I've really just really loved talking to you today. It's been awesome. So thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And, even as a partner of a neurodivergent person, I got a lot from your book. So I really appreciate it. And I know a lot of people will as well. So thank you. Written by neurodivergent psychologists for neurodivergent readers, this empowering workbook offers self compassion skills to help you embrace who you are and thrive. As an autistic person or neurodivergent individual with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, you may sometimes feel as if you're living in a world that wasn't designed for you. You may have sensory sensitivities, social difficulties, struggles with executive functioning, sleep issues, depression, anxiety, burnout and meltdowns, and trauma from a lifetime of marginalization and microaggressions. If you are struggling with your neurodivergent identity, know that you aren't alone. Whether you were diagnosed as a child or are just now realizing your difference, this workbook can help you move beyond the internalized message that there is something wrong with you, so you can embrace who you really are and manage stress before it leads to a neurodivergent burnout. The Neurodivergent Skills Workbook for Autism and ADHD offers acceptance and commitment therapy and self-compassion skills tailored to the needs of neurodiverse people, especially those with ADHD and autism, so you can live authentically, take pride in your identity, increase overall well-being, and build meaningful connections to thrive as a neurodivergent person in the modern world. This workbook will help you acknowledge your needs and be your own advocate, unmask and express your authentic self, reduce sensory overload and balance emotions, manage rejection sensitivity dysphoria and social anxiety, build meaningful social connections, improve executive functioning to get more done, adjust your environment to better fit your needs. Most importantly, you'll learn to take pride in your identity. Whether you're autistic, ADHD, or both, this workbook can help you overcome self-critical thinking, advocate for yourself in effective ways, and learn practical skills to help you thrive as your authentic self. Visit our website at www.newharbinger.com and use coupon code podcast25 to receive 25% off your entire order. New Harbinger Publications is an independent, employee-owned publisher of books on psychology, health, spirituality, and personal growth. For over 50 years, our evidence-based self-help books and pioneering workbooks have helped readers make positive changes to improve mental health and well-being. Founded by psychologists Matthew McKay and Patrick Fanning, New Harbinger is proud to be an employee-owned company. Our books reflect our core values of integrity, sustainability, compassion, and trust. Written by leaders in the field and recommended by therapists worldwide, New Harbinger books are practical, accessible, and provide real tools for real change. The best continuing education training does more than just fulfill requirements. It opens your mind to new possibilities, increases your confidence, and gives you powerful tools to transform your clients' lives. Praxis Continuing Education and Training partners with world-class experts to create cutting-edge, evidence-based courses for mental and behavioral health professionals. Learn how to heal trauma with Robin Walzer, explore values with Kelly Wilson, and master the basics of acceptance and commitment therapy with Matt Boone through an on-demand course. Or join experts and like-minded professionals live to take your practice to a new level. Find your next training opportunity at praxiscet.com. That's praxiscet.com. Do you have an idea for another episode? Do you want to send us a message? Our email address is podcast@newharbinger.com. We'd love to hear from you. This podcast was edited by Jesse Fancushion. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love if you rated, reviewed, and subscribed to the show, and we hope that you might share it with anyone who could benefit from the content. This podcast is not a substitute for counseling with a licensed provider.